Happy Sunday. We are going to be in Genesis 40, but let me tell you a little bit of what has come before. So, Joseph, who is Jacob, who's one of the patriarchs that we're studying's favorite son, was sold into slavery by his brothers. Eventually, he finds his way to Egypt, where he ends up working under a guy named Potiphar. And from there, he ends up kind of being beguiled by Potiphar's wife, and she ends up accusing him of trying to sexually abuse her. And because of that, Joseph ends up being taken into prison, which is where we find ourselves in Genesis 40. Now, it's interesting enough that I will call out a few things about our story so far. One is what I'm about to point out, but also is that Joseph could have been put to death for the crime he was accused of. So the fact that he was not tends to indicate to me that maybe his guilt wasn't always just automatically assumed. As well as that, as we join Joseph here in 40, verse 3, I'm going to go ahead and pick up another point that I think shows that Joseph still had some favor from really getting into this sort of circumstance in Egypt. And he put them in the ward in the house of the captain of the guard into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. Now, if we go back to 39:1, we're going to see, and Joseph was brought down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian. So when Joseph is accused of attacking this man's wife, not only is he not killed, but then he's also taken into the house of the guy whose wife he was accused of attacking. And then on top of that, as we continue into verse 4, and the captain of the guard charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in the ward. So he also made him in charge of them. So here, that's why I'm I don't know, was he really so believing his wife, or did he respect Joseph and he had to do what he had to do? Because here he brings him into his own house, he makes him in charge of the other prisoners. And then what comes next is interesting, because our dreamer is about to become a dream interpreter. And I always find it funny that in Daniel we get the dream interpreter becomes the dreamer. But here we're about to see the opposite, as Joseph is about to encounter two other men in the prison cell that the Pharaoh has put in there. And let's find out what happens when he goes to interpret their dreams. And they dreamed a dream, both of them, each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning, and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. And he asked the Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. So a few things here. One, when we hear the butler and the baker, right, that butler is the cupbearer. So we've got two guys really close to the Pharaoh, both having to do with his meal and his drink. Two important positions at this time, as a lot of leaders were afraid of being poisoned. And then on top of that, we also do see that Joseph takes a similar stance to when Daniel later will interpret dreams. He says, well, really, God interprets dreams, so just tell me what it is. I'm going to pray about it, sometimes all night, and then I'm going to give you the interpretation thereof, right? And because of that, that's where we know that God is truly our source and our power in all things. So it's one of those lessons we can pull from Scripture, that in our lives we need to really give it to God. God is going to handle things for us. It sort of is a nice little skill that we can pick up, is trusting God, which gives you any other skill. Let's continue on and find out what happens with the dreams. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph, and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head, and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former matter when thou wast his butler. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of his house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. So here the cupbearer gets the interpretation of the dream, and it's good, and he's going to be restored and lifted up in 3 days. And so then the baker says, hey, I want to get in on this action with this dream interpreter. And he starts to tell him his dream, and we're going to see the difference here. And the uppermost basket there was of all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days, yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee, and shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, so the cupbearer gets restored, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, so Joseph had interpreted it to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgate him. So here we see that, like, at the end of the day, God's interpretation is God's interpretation. That's what I take from these 2 dreams. And with that, we really do see that Joseph begins to make this transition from this brat, right, who was sort of antagonizing his brothers, right, had the cloak out there, got sold into slavery, into the man that God can turn any of us into, any person into. And that is really through submission, through prayer, through the trials, through understanding that God is our source, no matter what happens in life, and then ultimately being patient in our waiting seasons, which is where we're going to leave Joseph here today. All right, happy Sunday. Here we've been in Genesis 40, chatting at Cheesman. Happy Sunday.